"Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal." Probably one of the most renowned speeches in the world is the Gettysburg Address, given by President Abraham Lincoln himself. The speech was written after one of the bloodiest battles in America, the Civil War. There are many arguments about Abraham Lincoln's motives regarding slavery in the Union when it comes to the Civil War, but none can argue that it was his own influence that led to the inevitable abolishment of slavery, as well as the preservation of the Union of the States. Even after death, Lincoln's work influenced the decisions that helped to shape America into what it is today. In 1982, 49 historians and political scientists were asked to rate the presidents into 5 categories, based on their leadership, their accomplishments, their political skills, appointments, and their character or integrity. At the top of that list, hitting number 1 in every category, stands Abraham Lincoln, the nation's greatest president. He proved to be a very ambitious and dedicated man, putting himself through school and eventually becoming a lawyer and politician. His political affiliations put him in the running as a Republican, but even at the beginning of his political career, he proved the strategist, attracting the attention from the leaders of the Democratic Party due to his determination to avoid partisanship. They appointed him their postmaster, and so when he ran a second time for state legislator, he won. His strategy being no platform statements, no promises, and gave few speeches. Instead, he showed his sweet side, shaking hands, telling jokes, and visited almost all of the families that lived in the county. He won continuously as state legislator, earning him a reputation and a strong political ground. And by 1837, Lincoln started taking controversial positions that foreshadowed his career path, when he sided with 5 other legislators opposing a resolution that condemned abolitionists. During this time, there were many people being murdered, pro- and anti-slavery citizens alike. He gave a speech that emphasized the dangers posed to democracy when people used violence rather than votes and reason to get what they wanted. By 1858, Lincoln was in the running for president against Stephen Douglas, a Democrat who was running for his 3rd term. The people were becoming restless under his leadership, as violence and division on slavery was dividing the nation. Though Lincoln did not initially believe in the social equality of the races, he did believe that slavery was morally wrong and pledged in his presidential race that he would ultimately end it, as well as strengthen the Union again. Lincoln gave his House Divided speech, a powerful message that stressed that crisis over slavery would not be resolved until the nation was totally free. A house divided against itself cannot stand. He stated that slavery was immoral and had to be dealt with. It violated the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal. He reached out to the people with his powerful statement of how it went against the wishes of the Founding Fathers. Unfortunately, at the time, there was no constitutional way of dealing with slavery that already existed in the South, but he did oppose its spread to the free states. The Confederate States were fighting for their right to own slaves, stating that it was constitutional for men to protect their property. Unfortunately, the strong division led to the Civil War. When Abraham Lincoln was finally elected president in 1861, the South seceded from the Union. Southern states did not want their way of life to be changed, and secession occurred because they believed they no longer had a choice. Of course, just as the Republicans or Northern states disregarded the threats of secession from the Southern states, the Confederates also believed that the North would have no choice but to accept their secession peacefully, which was not the case. Violence broke out, and even worse than before. The world watched to see what Lincoln did as his first act as president. In his inaugural speech, Lincoln stated, "I am loath to close. We are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds." It was heartbreaking that a once united America had become divided with the war that ensued. Over the next couple of years, many people died, losing more than 600,000 soldiers. During this war, Lincoln proved to be a shrewd military strategist and a savvy leader, learning quickly about strategy and tactics, and chose the ablest commanders. Lincoln's prime objective was to save the Union, but in 1863 he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all the slaves in the rebellious states, but leaving those in the border states that were loyal to the Union. Though the motive was to save the crumbling Union, this became one of his greatest achievements. The Confederacy was beating them, and by freeing all the slaves in the rebellious states, it aroused a lot of them to head straight into the Union territories, where they willingly joined the Union ranks, officially giving the Union soldiers the edge they needed to ultimately win the war. In November of 1863, Lincoln delivered his well-known Gettysburg Address in dedication for the new National Cemetery at Gettysburg, stating, "407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." But little did Lincoln know that this world would note, as well as remember, what was done and said that day. The Union victory helped Lincoln get reelected, and with malice toward none, with charity for all, he urged his audience to welcome back the Southern states into the fold, as he stressed the need to reconstruct the South and rebuild the Union. The slaves still residing in the nation's border states had not been freed yet, but Lincoln did this to appease the opposite parties, as his first and foremost goal was the strengthening and preserving of the Union. But he did allow loopholes, so that it would force civil rights advocates to deal with it in the future, and as a result, the 13th Amendment was eventually passed after his death in 1865 that outlawed slavery completely, thanks to his argument for this to become a constitutional law. Lincoln truly did save the Union, though it took patience, careful timing, shrewd calculations, and an iron resolve. Ending slavery required the same resolve, and as a result of this, slavery was indeed abolished. Historians have acknowledged that President Lincoln's visionary presidential leadership left his legacy a whole and free United States. Abraham Lincoln truly was the nation's greatest president by every measure.